Okay, so as I'm reading today, same thing as yesterday. My favor that I'm asking of you is, can you think about and keep track of any new character traits that you think describe Pinmai? Based on our work yesterday, we said that she is curious, shy, and maybe a little bit insecure or like not very confident, since she was asking her grandma, like, do you wish I was different? And we've included the chapters. So if you notice a new character trait on top of her being shy, curious, and a little bit insecure, then at the end of the read aloud today, I'm going to ask you for your contributions and we can add anything new. Okay? All right, get cozy because it gets very exciting today. Chapter 3. Wake up, Pinmai, wake up! Pinmai's eyes opened, more from the urgency in Ama's voice than the shaking of her shoulders. In the blackness of the room, Ama's face was a thin sliver above her, like the moon on its last night. Come quickly! Ama? Pinmai said. What? Shh! Ama said. The softness of her voice was unable to hide its intensity, and she was already pushing Pinmai into the darkness. Not a word! Hurry, hurry! Pinmai looked at Ama's face for answers, but could see only its bare outline in the shadows. In the unlit rooms, the night was as solid as lacquered wood. Pinmai wondered why Ama did not light a lantern. She silently stumbled as Ama dragged her to the hut's storage room, the freezing drafts biting her feet. But those bare feet that knew the feel of the mountain also felt something else. There was a slight rhythmic trembling, as if the ground itself was scared. And suddenly, Pinmai knew why Ama had not brought out a lantern. Somebody was coming. In here, Ama said, pushing Pinmai towards a huge vat. In the old gong? Pinmai said. The gong was a giant clay container that had once held wine, but now it was empty and cracking. It sat in the storage room only because it was too big for Ama to get rid of it. It now has a use, Ama said, as she hoisted Pinmai up. As does your quietness. Now is the time to use your gift of silence, Pinmai. Ama, Pinmai protested. What? The mountain is not stopping them from coming, Ama said, more to herself than to Pinmai. Perhaps there are just too many, or it does not dare, for it might injure those who are blameless. But Yishan will watch out for you. Yishan? Pinmai asked. Why? Remember, Ama said, shushing her. You can always trust Yishan. Ignoring the rest of Pinmai's protests, she gently but firmly pushed Pinmai down inside the gong. Pinmai clutched her knees, grimacing as the grime of decades rubbed against her. She twisted in the vat, the rough pottery scratching her cheek. But she was rewarded by a good-sized crack at eye level. She saw Ama swiftly shuffling baskets and boxes to further hide the gong. Ama, Pinmai whispered, where will you hide? Instead of answering, Ama came to the gong and rested her hand on Pinmai's head. Through the crack, Pinmai saw the worn knot of Ama's sash. The frayed threads, like delicate hairs of a newborn child, caught the dim light from the doorway. My quiet girl, Ama said softly. And then, silently, Ama took a large platter, placed it over the gong's opening, and left. Chapter 4. They came like thunder. The wind and sky were eerily quiet, so even with the muffling snow, the thumping echoed. The baskets and pots Amma had placed on the floor near the gong trembled as the beating came closer and closer. When they finally arrived, they seemed to crash into the house, for the front door clattered to the floor like a fallen tree. Even though Pinmai couldn't see much from the gong, she squeezed her eyes shut. Anybody else do that when you're scared? Try to squeeze your eyes shut? Then there were men's voices, rough, harsh, commanding. When Pinmai finally dared to open her eyes, the crack in the gong let her see the angry fires of the soldiers' torches. The orange flames made the men and horses glow like demons. Then Pinmai gasped, for there was Amma. She stood in the open doorway, as if she was waiting. "Good evening," Amma said, her low voice spilling into the crowd like a stream of water. "I hope you did not abuse your horses just to reach this old body." "That's her!" a rough voice roared through the cold night. "She's the one we want. Take her." "His soldiers come to the villages late at night, taking away all the men," the villagers had said. Were the soldiers here for Amma? Why? She wasn't a young man. "Shall we go then?" Amma said, as if asking Pinmai to gather firewood. Amma's silhouette was still and calm against the flickering light of the flames. The ocean of shadows swayed in a mad dance around her. In response, the soldiers growled in unison, the sound swelling into a snarl. And then, in one swift, brutal motion, like a monstrous snake swallowing its prey, the man swept Amma into the blackness of night. The men, swept Amma into the blackness of the night. Chapter 5. Anybody recognize that? Pinmai could do nothing. As she stared, her arms, her legs, her whole body froze into the cold stone of the gong. She couldn't even whisper the desperate wailing cry that throbbed in her chest. Soldiers began to bang into the hut. They lit the lanterns, and Pinmai could see everything as if it were a stage. Once, when she was younger, Amma had taken her down to the village to see some traveling entertainers, and Pinmai felt as if she was watching a performance once again. But this show was a total nightmare. The soldiers overturned the tables and the chairs, and Amma's carefully organized box of threads and sewing tools were strewn on the floor, red silk lying on the ground that looked like a pool of blood. "There's not enough room in this hovel for more than the two of us," said one man, his elaborate armor and demeanor marking him as the commander. "You stay," he barked, motioning to a soldier in green. "Everyone else, out!" When all the others had left, the commander turned to the remaining soldier with a transformed manner. "Your exalted majesty," the commander said, bowing his head. "We have the storyteller. Was there another purpose for your honorable presence on this excursion?" The soldier took off his helmet, and Pinmai could see he was much older than the commander. His pointed beard was veined with white, as were his eyebrows, arched like poisonous centipedes. She also saw that his uniform was slightly ill-fitting, his girth stretching the scales of his armor, which is like a way of saying that his clothes were a little bit too tight. He must be a king or some other royalty in disguise. "The old woman gave up too easily," he said, his voice low and harsh. "She is trying to hide something." He scanned the walls and shelves and floors. stepping deliberately. As he kicked aside a small bamboo container, needles spilled out. Their sharp points glittered in the lamplight, and the king, or whoever he was, pulled at the scarf around his neck and clutched at his collar. He crossed into the storage room, the other man following. Their steps came closer and closer to Pinmai, each thud of their boots echoing the pounding of her heart. The smell of cold and horse and oiled leather filled her nose, and she could see the lacings of each small plate of their armor. What is that? The king breathed sharply and stopped directly in front of the gong. Pinmai's breath left her, yet she couldn't look away or even close her eyes. The king bent over, as if he had been looking at the gong. And if he had been looking at the gong, he could have seen Pinmai through the crack, her eyes fixed upon him like those of a trapped mouse. But the king was not looking at the gong. He was looking over it, and he was staring with such intensity, the air around him seemed to crackle. With a sudden, forceful movement, he reached out his arm, his collar falling open, so Pinmai could see a silver pin sticking out from the imperial gold silk of his hidden robe. Imperial gold silk. That meant this pretend soldier was not just a king. He was the king of all the kings. He was the emperor. "This is mine," the emperor said, with an anger that would have surprised Pinmai had she been capable of feeling any more shock. He was holding the blue rice bowl with the white rabbit painted on it. And you guys want to read one more chapter? Okay. It's a short one. Chapter 6. "Yes, your exalted majesty," the commander said, as the emperor handed the bowl to him. He held it as if it were made of eggshells, and Pinmai could see it took great effort for the commander not to prostrate himself on the floor. Prostrating yourself is when you bow all the way down to the ground. "Was there anything else, your majesty?" The emperor looked around the hut as if it smelled of rotten fish. "No," he said in disgust. "Take the old woman and join the other troops at the bottom of this accursed mountain." At that moment, a loud clamor sounded outside the hut. The emperor replaced his helmet as the commander strode to the doorway. "What's the problem?" the commander snapped. There was a brief sound of struggle, and a soldier entered. "Just this boy," he said, shoving a small figure forward so he fell into the room. "Yishan." It looked as if the entire cavalry had trampled on him, for his filthy shirt was the color of soot. His hat was gone, but his head, also grime-spattered, was raised high. The commander waved the soldier away with his hand. "Do not take her," Yishan said, angrily, as if continuing a conversation. The emperor and the commander laughed. "Ha! Here is a small pup, pretending to be a dog," the emperor mocked. Yishan's face flushed, but he still would not bow his head. "At least it's more honorable than a tiger pretending to be a man," he said, his eyes flashing. The laughter stopped. Even under the soldier's helmet, Pinmai could see the emperor's eyes narrow. In 2 ferocious strides, the emperor seized and lifted the boy, as if he were an animal that the emperor planned to slaughter. The emperor's eyes scanned Yishan intently, from his muck-covered robes to his grubby face and matted hair. A faint, foul smell of horse dung drifted off the boy. The emperor snorted in disgust. Oh, you're just another dirty turtle egg, like all the others, he growled. You want the old woman? Bring the emperor a luminous stone that lights the night, and you can have her. And as if Yishan were no more than a sack of rice, he tossed the boy to the floor. He retucked his scarf around his neck, and he spat out his next words like venom. Burn the place, he said. Whew. And that is where we stop for today. All right, I know